is, thanks Meredith for recording that, is our $30 million program on interdisciplinary convergence science in the Arctic, really looking at science at the intersections of the natural, social, and built environments, thinking and really geared towards more use-inspired or solution-oriented science. So Matt Druckenmiller, who's the lead PI of the NNA Community Office, provided a really nice overview of what they were doing to try to bring all of these projects that NSF is funding together to think about how we can kind of, what I like to say, multiply the science being done by being funded by NNA. And so it was a really nice conversation and overview. Meredith has posted the slides and all the notes. So actually I'll just pop that in the chat now here if you weren't able to make it to that meeting. And it really helped kick us off for a really nice conversation about interdisciplinarity. And we had a really good discussion on how, you know, the really difficult parts of doing interdisciplinary science and collaboration building really really requires you to be really vulnerable in spaces, and that sometimes failure is a part of learning, and that you're going to be speaking to people who speak different disciplinary languages, or actually different languages as well, and just trying to figure out how to really figure out a way to communicate and to build these interdisciplinary spaces. We also had Britt Myers from ARCUS, that is also funded by NSF, who it's been funded by NSF for a long time now to help kind of do similar things, in which trying to get people together to talk you know, bring new researchers together, new people together, and thinking about how to promote interdisciplinary research. How do we broaden networking opportunities? Thinking about how we're communicating Arctic research to other audiences. How are we prioritizing community and Indigenous needs and research goals as well? And also how are we training people as too? We also had this really compelling kind of conversation about friction. And I think someone had recommended a book by an anthropologist named Anna Singh. And just thinking about how friction is really important for kind of moving the intellectual enterprise forward, especially in interdisciplinary conversations. So that's just a quick overview. It was a really good conversation. John or Meredith, do you have anything to add based on that conversation that I missed or you think might be good to bring up?
I don't think I have anything else. Meredith, do you?
Yeah, I'll just note that I remember there were several mentions of trainings or the need for trainings around interdisciplinary work, and that this was maybe an important aspect that gets kind of overlooked sometimes, that people actually need to be trained to do this work.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Meredith, thanks. And so we actually had 3 questions that that we had framed for that meeting that we actually didn't get to because we were talking about so many other things. So those questions are, what are the challenges to building interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary convergence projects? Kind of choose whatever word fits your project best. How are researchers connecting with the right people to build interdisciplinary projects? And Gay Sheffield, who isn't here today, kind of brought up at the very tail end of that meeting on who the right people even are and how you identify who those right people are. And the third question was, how are researchers successfully developing research questions in this space? So those are a couple of questions that we can talk about. I don't know if anybody has some initial reactions to the meeting from last time, or John, if you want to take it over and show some of Kelsey's products that we were hoping to see today.
Yeah, I might save those till toward the end. I feel
Okay.
like it's a bit of a different topic, but does get to some of these things, especially about you know, developing successful research questions and connecting with right people. I can share a post that I did for IARPIC about something called participatory research or participatory budgeting specifically. And it was based on a TED talk that I heard on the radio, and I can share that link in a minute. But yeah, maybe Colleen, maybe we could focus on your 3 questions to start the conversation.
Sure. So I just popped them in the chat. And I'm wondering if anybody wants to share their experiences or initial reactions to the kind of summary I just provided, or I'll just open the floor. Go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of report back because Corey Erickson gave the keynote at the Community and Citizen Science Conference today. And his talk was about why it's so hard to connect with Arctic communities and doing Arctic research. And he had some really fantastic points, but one of the key takeaways I took from it was just, sometimes when you reach out to trying to find the right partners, especially Indigenous community members, you're gonna get rejected. You have to be prepared to mentally accept that and either move on or try again. So, the process of how to connect with people in communities or working in cultures that are very vastly different from how we work in government or academia. Just be prepared to take some rejection and just work with people as people first. And hopefully that really establishes the right kinds of relationships to equitably build the right types of research questions.
Really good point, Olivia. I think that speaks to some of the conversations we had last time about failure, not only in kind of identifying partners and reaching out to people, but also just trying new types of research questions and methodologies that may or may not work as well.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say something. So I started, okay, so there's a group called the Food Security Working Group. They started out of the Arctic Observing Summits, and it's kind of grown to its own kind of informal network. And so I'm hired now one of 3 Indigenous liaisons for them, particularly to work on Arctic observing, particularly with the group RNA Co-ops, which is the PI's Hio Aiken, and it's working towards Seance roads. Not sure, probably not everyone was aware of what all that is in this group, but basically Seance roads is thinking about how we improve Arctic observing, like coordination planning, so it kind of all works together instead of like these very different pockets. And so it's supposed to be in co-production with the Food Security Working Group being almost like a boundary organization with communities in the Southwest Alaska. And so it's a big task because I've been having a lot of trouble and even thinking about kind of how to approach it, because there's not any shared understanding, because the people in RNA co-ops are very technical. They think a lot about the infrastructure, satellites, very technical things and like hardly any experience with Indigenous communities, what the Indigenous worldview, what does it mean, like Indigenous knowledge and how that goes into Arctic observing from Indigenous observations. So it's just, at the same time too, it's just like, they're so technical. And then I try to work with the Food Security Working Group on certain things, and they don't generally have that broader understanding of these huge national agencies and what they're doing. And it is just kind of like very 2 different groups. And I feel like they're also in it for slightly different reasons. And it's a lot. It's very challenging. And I just can only think of just starting to plan just recursive activities, and like similar how my research builds into that. One of my dissertation papers is on perceptions of success and how you measure success from the 2 different groups. So yeah.
It's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I'm wondering if you think if anything could have been different at like the start of the project to make it easier, or if you think this is just kind of a process you need to go through just to kind of figure out how to work together. Do you think if there could be something different that could have helped?
Yeah, I think one of the problems was that it was The proposal was for something completely different that
Okay.
eventually got funded. It was for funding for participation in AOS and then to continue the meetings after AOS Arctic Observing Summit and to have intermediate meetings between, but then COVID. And,
yeah.
and then one of the major organizations that was Indigenous that were part of it ended up not being able to commit to that project. And I think it was also too, I don't think there was really a strong understanding of what it would mean. I think there was a lot of assumptions that the Food Security Working Group would just give RNA co-ops like a list of things that should be observed. And Food Security Working Group has made it very clear that no, it needs to be a lot more than that. We have to think about the process of how we come to those lists. Not only that, of like how actually Arctic observing happens, like there should be Indigenous leadership in it, things like that. And to actually to work towards food sovereignty has a big policy component, which has not been accounted for, because again, RNA co-ops is very technical, which obviously if you're talking about subsistence way of life includes the policy aspect. So
yeah, it's super interesting. Just again about like thinking about different types of data and how to collect them and what even are data and things like that is just kind of one of those obstacles.
So Margaret, I'm just curious if from that experience, did you all come up with some guidelines for sort of the next time you might sort of try to do this interdisciplinary or this next kind of a project type?
yeah, so part of the way that we decided to go forward was the hiring of these 3 Indigenous liaisons. I'm one of 3. I'm the science and technical one. They're paying for a third of my RA-ship. And then there's a full-time Indigenous coordinator, and he's going to lead the community engagement to the communities of Southwest Alaska. And then there's an international Indigenous liaison based in Greenland to kind of making sure, like, yes, there's case study focused on the North Pacific, but Say on Roads is international. And so making sure that we have that kind of connection to the broader kind of perspectives. So that's kind of it. So we're participating both in coordinating the Food Security Working Group and the meetings, as well as participating in our RNA co-ops activities.
Any thoughts from anyone else with kind of similar experiences or working with multiple groups on a project?
Hi, this is Allison from Homer. I've been working on the Arctic Research Mapping application and Arctic Observing Viewer, and we've found some challenges in that, you know, we're very U.S. National Science Foundation focused, and in the communities, folks just don't really care who's, you know, which agency is funding the project or which agency is funding that tower. I know from my experience in living up in Upyavik for almost 6 years and doing ongoing work up there that, you know, the residents just want to know what that new construction effort is, how is it going to benefit me? And, you know, I think we've struggled in our work over the years, you know, to create inventories of who's doing what, when, and where. And while we can, on a technical level, figure out the solutions for sharing that information, the challenge is maintaining it and coming up with the funding to maintain it. You know, I think we had a lot of success several years ago in getting U.S. agencies to share information, and then that kind of fell to the wayside. And I'm seeing that again. And in our work, we're looking at, you know, what are we doing moving forward for the next cooperative agreement, and how can we do a better job and sharing information with communities. And so it's really interesting to hear, you know, Margaret's perspective, because yeah, I feel for you. So yeah, we're open to feedback, and if there's something we can do in the space to contribute, trying to figure out what makes sense and how we can do a better job moving forward, and what that's going to look like. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Allison. Anyone else? Well, I could talk a little bit about some of these other participatory topics, Colleen, if you want, or do you have anything you want to
Yeah,
finish?
that sounds great. Thanks, John.
I guess I can start by, I'll share the post that I did to IRPIC. I think this was back in July. And this just happened to be a radio program that I heard when I was down in Seward for the weekend. And it's a TED Talk. The woman talked a lot about something called participatory budgeting for communities. And this is a bit different situation I think many of us encounter, but maybe not, where a community has an opportunity to receive funding or has just received a grant, excuse me, and is now sitting down as a community to talk about how are we going to use this funding? What are the things that we want to see take place in our community or our neighborhood or our surroundings that we could use this money for? And it was a really compelling discussion and made me think a lot about participatory research and how we could potentially do some of this kind of participatory budgeting in Arctic research by meeting with different communities or different partners to say, hey, here's an opportunity, or we have some existing funding and we want to direct it towards this region or towards this set of ideas, and how can we sit down and work together to come up with some projects or ways to use this financial support to do something that we all want to see. So I just thought it was a really fun thought exercise for how I could conduct work in the Arctic. And so I posted this, and then Kelsey Aho, who's with the Forest Service Alaska region, was our guest speaker today. And so she was going to share some ideas on how the Forest Service is approaching a similar idea. And that's through the links that we provided in the agenda. And I can share my screen and just show how that looks. You all can explore that too. Let's see. So can you all see that okay?
Yes, we can see your browser. There we go.
So this is the link, I think the first link in the agenda that takes you to the US Forest Service Alaska Region Outdoor Projects. And so this is sort of a story map format, but you can click on these individual icons and it will tell you what the project is there. So in this case, it's a bridge replacement in the Chugach National Forest in South Central Alaska. And we'll talk about what the project will do, that it's been proposed for future funding, in this case in 2022. And so it sort of lists all the different possibilities that the Forest Service is considering spending potential funding on. And then there's this other tab called Project Proposals and Comments. And if you go there, it's some of those same project icons. And if you click on them, it again redefines what the project is, but then the public can post comments to that project and sort of vote for what they think the Forest Service should do in that area, with potential funding. So it's not quite the sit around the table and talk about ideas that is on the radio program, but it's sort of a way to get at advertising what the Forest Service is considering doing for work and ways to receive some public input on those ideas. What I don't know is then how the Forest Service then goes forward with these ideas to make plans, and if there's feedback to the community of people that posted those comments. So that was something that I was hoping Kelsey could talk about. And I know it's a much broader initiative than sort of the way I've described it. And that's, again, why we wanted Kelsey to be on, but unfortunately she's not here. But to me, this just seems like a really interesting idea for advertising what an agency plans might be, to get some feedback and then potentially have some follow-up discussion about those, but I'm not really sure quite how that works. So any thoughts on any of that, or have other people maybe tried this sort of method to share plans and get feedback?
So I'll just chime in and say this is, it's really cool to kind of see that people can comment on it with kind of I think a lot of, I'm a very spatial thinker. So just being able to see a map and where things are going to happen and where things are planned to happen, to be able to comment on that is really helpful to me. And I know we've already brought up Corey Erickson once in this call, so it's not surprising that I'm going to bring him up again. But he had, and hi to Shoko's cat. Welcome to the welcome to the meeting. I think in the federal government we have this federal registered notice process, which is really not the easiest process or user-friendly process, especially if you're not a Fed to navigate. And so I'd be curious to hear from Kelsey if we can maybe follow up with her after this meeting on how this kind of might relate to the federal register notice process as well. It might be an easier way to get feedback from the public than how we've been able to do so in the past.
I'm sorry, Shoko, I missed your post there.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, Shoko, do you want to kind of explain your comment at all, your chat?
Oh, it was just speaking to the first question of the challenges of building interdisciplinary convergence projects without going into too much detail, but just, if you're working with communities who have different goals that are sometimes changing, it just can be difficult, even if you have flexibility, and people might contort themselves into shapes of like, oh well, I thought that you were doing whatever. And anyways, just like the importance of being intentional about taking time and setting up like reflective moments of like, is this working? And just how difficult some of the funding cycles are to actually be able to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Shoko. And I've had similar challenges in my kind of research career when I was trying to set up, grants with my collaborators, and all of a sudden the grant is due from announcement in like 45 days and you're just scrambling. And fortunately I had relationships in place and projects ideas, but if I did not have those, then I wouldn't have made those deadlines. And I see that Bob agrees with you too. And I think probably most people on the call agree, because I will say that I think funding for those kind of initial relationship building steps can be hard to come by. But I did just post a Twitter thread on Friday about this, because I keep hearing more and more that, we need money for the collaboration building, the relationship building, and the planning. And so NSF now has a new planning grant that's NSF wide, which is really exciting. So we have kind of our workshop grants. We have planning grants, which we had in NNA and now is NSF wide, which is really exciting to hear that you can get like $200,000 just to kind of sit in a room with people and come up with those research questions. And then we also have things like research coordination networks. And so kind of having that seed funding to really sit down and build those relationships and research questions, I think is something that more and more funding agencies and federal agencies are beginning to realize the value of those. Margaret, do you want to go ahead and kind of chime in on your chat?
Yeah, sure. I was just, driving off what Shoko said. But yeah, for another thing we have done besides the liaisons that we're currently working on is the principles of research conduct. And so some of it is kind of lining out, like, they want it to be co-production knowledge. So what does that exactly mean in the context of this project? And same thing, we want it to be about food security. And so what does that mean in the context of this project very explicitly, and kind of having that really laid out in the process and how decisions are going to get made. So there's a bit more building that trust and relationship between the two groups. And then it's going to be a living document, again, kind of what Shoga's saying, something we can go back to and reflect on pretty regularly. And it's expected to change as we start working with some communities. So because some communities have already developed protocols of research and things like that, and kind of their own tribal IRB and stuff like that. So yeah, that's something we've kind of also done to try to overcome some of the challenges.
Margaret, one question I have about that too is, do you all make a point of recognizing that sort of principles of conduct in final products or sort of at the end of the project, so other people sort of know about those guidelines or can learn from how to use them?
So we're working on, because we're drafting them right now. So we'll have them probably published on a website at some point. We'll probably present on it at some point too, to the
Okay.
broader audience, as kind of it being regular like case studies of how to proceed with it, because I think it's an important topic in relation to the Say On Roads process, and thinking about that and how different groups are approaching, which is kind of how Seance. Yeah, they're also trying to do the weird, it is kind of top down, but also bottom up, and trying to like, I don't know what Sandy's thinking exactly, but yeah.
No, I just think those are important steps to document, and maybe even in, method sections of papers, for example, about how things were determined and how things came together and the kind of communications that took place. It seems like those are important things to let other people know about. And I think a few people mentioned being interested in the story map idea. I'm not sure if other folks have tried those, or if you are interested in what you've thought about doing to sort of receive some feedback on plans, or just to get proposals going.
Hi, this is Allison again. I'll mention I've used them before, and particularly to try to share information with UPAVIC. And I think some of the challenges we found were just getting these resources to load and low bandwidth connections. And we could share a ton of information, and we got a lot of input on what to share. And we went ahead and did it. But unless you're on a high-speed connection, it's a problem. I love the story maps. They're a great format. So I'm just, I think we're really cautious about what we can actually put into them.
Chris, did you have a thought on that too?
Yeah, well, I was just actually curious about, because one of the same things, I mean, even here, if we move, even within Homer sometimes, like we're not super remote and we still have some of those same issues, as Allison knows, but particularly if you go to some of the smaller communities. But phone apps and, doing some of these similar tools through cell phone access, is anyone kind of working with that? The stuff that's a little bit easier to deal with in low bandwidth where you have. So I'm just curious what folks have been doing on that, or what the thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'm not aware. Meredith, are you building an IARPIC app?
No, not yet. I'll talk to Liz about it. But I have heard that an organization doing something like that is Bearing Watch, where they have an app that observers can go in and fill in information, I think without internet connection, and then load it back onto the site when they do get internet connection again. So that might be something we could get an update on at some point. That's Lauren Devine.
Lauren Devine, yeah, that's the one I've been thinking of, because that seems to be working quite well.
Yeah, they actually have multiple apps. They have like a suite of apps for different sorts of observations and taxa. And additionally, if you click the link, actually this is not the one, but they just started one where they're just trying to get anyone who's on a boat out in the Bering to log observations. So they're reaching out to captains and fisher people, and yeah, they have a lot of different options for apps.
Yeah, and I know in the conversations with Lauren, one of the things has been around making it interactive, so that it's not just the one-way piece, it's the being able to share. And I think, the story maps, like that's the cool thing, is like being able to see comments and being able to sort of have some ability, maybe not real-time interaction, but kind of have that back and forth exchange. I think is really the key. But how to do it technically, particularly with low bandwidth, we're just or ears for any ideas that people have.
Yeah, and maybe, maybe digital this kind of digital is not going to work so well in all applications. So there really needs to be a suite of possibilities or options for doing this kind of participatory work or interdisciplinary work. So just the good old standard mentioning it during a talk or on a phone call that, we're interested in this kind of a proposal or plan, but as part of that, we want it to be fully participatory, fully co-produced. How can you help us determine how to go that direction if that's of interest? So I think having some examples, and I think there are some out there of how that's worked, but there's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, about those ways of doing work within the next Arctic research plan. So stay tuned. I think that's going to be a really fun next couple of months once that gets released to talk more about how best to do that.
So I'm seeing a lot of really good recommendations in the chat. And I know Meredith is very diligent about notes and making sure, so we'll put those on the notes for this meeting so everyone has them. If you can't save the chat, I think that would be helpful. So I like to end my meetings 5 minutes early to give everyone a chance for a bio break before the endless Zoom calls. But I just wanted to open up the floor for any final comments at all. This was, despite not having a speaker, I think we all came together really well to brainstorm some really good solutions. So I'll just open up the floor for any last comments or sharing for ideas. Go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, just real quick, as we are all developing new research tools, we have to think about ways to make this giant amount of data useful, findable,
Yes.
easy to use. I just looked at the US Climate Resilience Toolkit and typed in sea ice, and there were over 2,000 documents. There's no way I'm going through all of those to find the right tool for me. So, in addition to us making great products, how can we make sure that it's always findable?
Yeah, I think you used a term that I've been really thinking about with data, Olivia. So I think we talk about the FAIR principles a lot with data. So findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But I always think there's a U missing in there, which useful data. And what does that data actually look like, and how do you actually use it? I think it should be like fair U or something like that. All of a sudden the acronym is broken if you add that. But there have been a lot of data thinkers who have started incorporating that word into it, which I completely agree with you is going to be critical for the future of interdisciplinary science and research. Any other final comments at all? Fair for you. I like it. And then we have the CARE principles too, right? So we can try to figure out how to get those all together. Actually, how about John, do you want me to hand it off to you to close this meeting out?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for all your great comments. And thanks, Meredith, for helping with the notes and searching for Kelsey. We'll have Kelsey come back another time because really enjoyed talking to her in preparation for this meeting. That was a few months ago though. So we will try again, but thanks so much for everyone for being here.
Yeah, thank you. And again, if you have any suggestions for new team leads or you're interested in participating yourselves, please feel free to reach out, and happy to answer any questions at all about that. So have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.